The Zifran Empire had ruled this part of the galaxy for centuries. Their fleet was vast, their technology unmatched. At least, that's what they believed. But that belief started to crack when an unidentified warship entered their star system, moving silently through the void. At first, the Zifran sensors barely detected it. The ship had no transponder signal, no registration in their vast database of known species. It was a ghost, a shadow in space. Commander Valrek, stationed aboard the orbital defense station, stared at the readings with growing unease. Ships didn't just appear out of nowhere. Even the most advanced cloaking technologies left traces. But this ship, it moved like it was part of the darkness itself. The first reaction was caution. Zifran protocol demanded immediate contact with unknown vessels. A transmission was sent, crisp and formal. Unidentified warship, you have entered sovereign Zifran space. Identify yourself immediately, or you will be considered a hostile entity. Silence. Valrek frowned. He glanced at his officers, each of them waiting for a response that never came. The ship continued its slow but deliberate approach toward the inner system. Seconds stretched into minutes. The tension in the command center grew thick, heavy. Zifran warships had already begun repositioning, forming a defensive perimeter. If this vessel refused to answer, they would have no choice but to fire. Then, the warship changed course, toward them. Valrek's scales itched. This was no accident. No simple drift. Whoever was inside that vessel was choosing to move closer, knowing full well that the Zifran fleet was watching. "Commander," one of the officers spoke, voice tight with nervousness. "Should we fire a warning shot?" Valrek hesitated. He didn't like opening fire on something he didn't understand. But this silence, this eerie, unnatural silence, was making his instincts scream. "Do it." A Zifran battleship locked onto the vessel and unleashed a bright pulse of plasma. The energy blast streaked through the void, closing the distance in an instant. It was a direct hit. And yet, nothing happened. The warship didn't slow down. Its shields didn't flicker. No retaliation came. It simply kept coming. Whispers spread through the command deck. The shot should have at least registered some effect. But it was like the ship didn't even acknowledge the attack. Valrek's heart pounded. His instincts were telling him something was very, very wrong. "Commander, I'm detecting a transmission now," the communications officer suddenly announced. Valrek leaned forward. "Finally. Put it through." The message came in clear, deep, and controlled. There was no anger, no panic, just a simple, chilling statement. "Stand down. This is your only warning." The command deck fell silent. The voice was unfamiliar, but the language was perfectly translated, fluent, precise, and carrying an unmistakable authority. Valrek's claws tightened around the edge of his control panel. He had never heard a transmission quite like this. Not a demand, not a request. A warning. "Commander," the sensors officer spoke, voice shaking slightly. "I ran another scan on that vessel." Valrek turned to him. "And?" The officer swallowed. "Sir, it's human." The words seemed to freeze the air. Every Zifran officer in the room went still. Humans. They were the nightmare species, the Dithworlders, the creatures that every advanced civilization whispered about but rarely encountered. The reason entire empires had chosen to avoid Earth's sector altogether. And now one of their warships was here. Valrek's blood turned cold. The Zifran fleet had fired on them. The war had already begun. The command deck of the Zifran orbital station was drowning in silence. Every officer, every soldier present had the same look on their faces. Fear. The unidentified warship was human. Valrek felt the weight of those words settle deep in his chest. Humans were not just another species in the galaxy. They were the ones the Zifran Empire had avoided for centuries. The ones even war-hardened civilizations chose to leave alone. And now, their warship was here. His mind raced. They had fired on them. An unprovoked attack. And the ship had done nothing in response. No counterattack, no evasive maneuvers, just a single warning. Why? "Commander," one of his officers whispered, breaking the stillness. "What do we do?" Valric's fingers clenched. His instincts screamed at him to retreat, to call for reinforcements. But would that help? The humans had already demonstrated something far more terrifying than firepower. They weren't afraid. The warship continued its silent approach, cutting through the darkness like a ghost. "Open another transmission," Valric ordered, forcing his voice to remain steady. The comms officer obeyed. A second message was sent. "Human vessel, you have entered restricted Zifran space. State your purpose." Again, silence. Valric's throat tightened. Maybe they wouldn't answer. Maybe they didn't need to. Then suddenly, "Your Empire made a mistake." The deep, controlled voice echoed through the command deck. Valric's claws dug into the metal surface of his station. Made a mistake. He exchanged uneasy glances with his officers. What did that mean? What had they done? "Sir," the sensors officer said, his voice shaking, "I have an energy reading from the human vessel." Valric turned sharply. "Weapons?" "No, sir. They're scanning us." His chest tightened. Scanning. That was never good. "Commander," another officer interrupted, "we should request additional forces. If they're preparing an attack, we won't get reinforcements in time." Valric snapped, but his mind was already calculating. Even if they did call for backup, how effective would it be? This wasn't a negotiation. This was a test. Then the human warship did something unexpected. It stopped. Just outside their defensive perimeter, the massive vessel halted in place, hanging in the void like a silent predator watching its prey. Seconds passed, then minutes. No movement. "What are they waiting for?" someone whispered. Valric didn't have an answer. Then, another transmission. "Your Empire fired first." Valric's breath caught. They know. The Zifran Empire had assumed their dominance was unquestioned, that any unknown ship could be fired upon without consequence. But the humans were making this clear. They weren't the ones who started this. A cold realization settled over the command deck. Valric looked at the massive human vessel, its dark hull barely reflecting the distant starlight. They had power, that much was certain. But instead of retaliation, they were waiting. For what? Then it hit him. They were waiting for his next move. The next decision would determine everything. War or survival. The command deck remained eerily silent. Valric could hear his own breathing, heavy and uneven. The human warship had not fired a single shot. It simply hovered there, waiting. For a species known for its aggression, this silence was more terrifying than any weapon. Valric turned toward his second-in-command, Officer Greth. "What do you think they want?" Greth's fur bristled. "They're testing us, Commander. They know we attacked first. Now they want to see if we understand the consequences." The weight of those words settled deep in Valric's gut. The Zifran Empire prided itself on strength, on never backing down. To show fear was to invite destruction. But right now, fear was survival. "Commander," the sensors officer called out, "the human ship is transmitting something strange." Valric's claws tapped the control panel. "Strange how?" "It's a data stream. Not words. Just pure data." His eyes narrowed. "Can we decipher it?" The officer's fingers moved quickly over the controls. Moments later, the main display screen flickered to life. The room fell deathly silent. The screen displayed battle footage. But not of humans. Not at first. The recording showed a fleet of Zifran warships engaging another alien species in combat. It was old, decades old. But Valric recognized the battle instantly. It was from the War of Subjugation, a time when the Zifran Empire had expanded its reach, crushing smaller civilizations under its rule. Then the footage shifted. This time, it showed a different fleet, human warships, not in battle, but responding. They weren't fighting. They were evacuating the very species the Ziphrans had nearly destroyed. Valric's throat went dry. Another shift. Now the footage showed something new. Something terrifying. Ziphran ships burning. Shattered hulls drifting in space. Entire fleets reduced to debris. The screen flickered, and a final message appeared. We were there before. We will be here again. The transmission ended. The screen went dark. No one spoke. Greth's voice was barely a whisper. They know everything. Valric exhaled slowly. The humans weren't here to start a war. They weren't even here for revenge. They were here to remind them. A single wrong move, and the Ziphran Empire would become another burning wreckage in the void. The bridge of the Ziphran command vessel was heavy with silence. The human warship still had not moved, had not fired, had not spoken. Yet its mere presence was suffocating. Commander Valric's claws drummed against the control panel, his mind racing. The footage they had just witnessed was not a threat. It was a warning. Greth cleared his throat. Commander, what do we do? The question hung in the air. The Ziphran Empire had never backed down before. They ruled through fear, through dominance. Surrender was not in their nature. But humans were different. Valric had studied their history. They did not conquer. They did not rule. But when pushed, they ended wars with terrifying finality. Their presence in this system meant only one thing. The Ziphrans had crossed a line. A soft beep interrupted his thoughts. Commander, the sensors officer whispered. The human ship is hailing us. The tension thickened. Valric inhaled deeply and straightened his posture. On screen, the display flickered and a human figure appeared. A male, dressed in a dark uniform. His expression was unreadable, his gaze sharp, unshaken. This is Captain Elias Ward of the UNSF Dreadnought Vanguard. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. You have violated a protected sector. You have engaged in hostilities. We are here to determine your intent. Valric's throat tightened. They know. He forced his voice to remain steady. We were unaware of any human claims to this sector. Captain Ward's lips twitched, not a smile. A warning. This isn't about claims, Commander. He leaned forward. This is about what comes next. A pause. We have seen your wars, Ward continued. We have seen your empire grow through bloodshed. His gaze darkened. You believe in dominance, in fear. But tell me, Commander. The human leaned just slightly closer. What do you fear? The question sent a ripple of unease across the bridge. Ziphrans ruled through intimidation, through overwhelming force. But humans, they didn't play by the same rules. Valric's claws curled into his palm. His mind screamed at him to respond, to maintain control. But he had no answer. The silence stretched. Finally, Captain Ward's voice dropped to something cold. Absolute. This is your only chance to walk away. The transmission ended. The bridge remained deathly still. For the first time in his life, Commander Valric felt fear. The command center of the Ziphran warship was filled with tense energy. The transmission had ended, but the weight of the human's words still lingered in the air. Commander Valric had always believed in the strength of the Ziphran Empire. Now, for the first time, he doubted it. Greth, his second in command, hesitated before speaking. Commander, if we retreat now, the Council will demand an explanation. Valric's mandibles clicked in frustration. Retreat was dishonor, but was survival worse? He turned to the tactical officer. What do we know about the human ship? The officer's scales paled. Their energy readings are unlike anything we've seen. Their shields remain at full power, and yet we detected no known weapon systems. But the power signatures suggest. He hesitated. Suggest what? Valric snapped. The officer swallowed hard. Commander, their energy output surpasses anything in our fleet. If they have weapons, we have no countermeasure. A deep, gnawing sensation settled in Valric's gut. This was not how the Zifran Empire fought wars. They were supposed to be the ones who inspired fear. A new alert flashed on the command screen. Incoming transmission, the comms officer announced. It's not from the human ship. Valric frowned. Patch it through. The screen flickered to life, revealing a Korthan. The entire bridge tensed. The Korthan Dominion had been the Zifran Empire's bitter enemy for centuries. This war was supposed to be their battle. But now, a Korthan general was staring at them with an expression that Valric had never seen before. Fear. Zifran commander, the Korthan general said, voice tight. If you value your fleet, you will stand down. Valric's mandibles flared in shock. You expect me to listen to a Korthan coward? The general's eyes darkened. Coward. He shook his head. You still don't understand, do you? The screen split, displaying grainy footage, old but unmistakable. A ruined battlefield. A Korthan fleet, burning in space, and in the center of the destruction, a single human warship. This was our first encounter with humans, the general said bitterly. We underestimated them. We believed they were weak, that they lacked the will to fight. His voice dropped to a whisper. We were wrong. Valric's claws dug into the console. He had heard the rumors, but he never believed them. The Korthan general leaned closer to the screen. Do you know what they told us? Valric remained silent. They said they didn't start this war. The general's voice trembled, but they made sure we were the ones who ended it. A long pause. Commander, Greth said hesitantly. Orders. Valric's breathing was slow and measured. The warship Vanguard remained in the void, unmoving, waiting. Valric exhaled. This was not a battle they could win. Stand down, he ordered. For the first time in Zifran history, they chose to retreat. The Zifran fleet drifted in silence. The order to stand down had been given, but the shame of retreat hung heavy in the air. No one spoke as the human warship, Vanguard, remained unmoving, its presence a quiet warning. Commander Valric stared at the tactical display. This was not how battles were supposed to unfold. His forces were stronger, larger, and well-equipped. And yet they had surrendered without a single shot fired. A low chime broke the silence. Commander, the comms officer said, his voice uneasy. The humans, they are hailing us. Valric's mandibles tightened. This was unexpected. He nodded sharply. Open the channel. The screen flickered, revealing the human commander. His expression was unreadable, but there was no mockery in his eyes, only calm certainty. So, the human said, you made the right choice. Valric's claws curled. The right choice. The word stung. We did not surrender, he said carefully. We chose to avoid unnecessary conflict. The human's lips curled slightly. Call it what you like, but your fleet is still here, still intact. His eyes darkened. And that is something we were willing to take from you. Valric felt the weight behind those words. They had been ready to annihilate the Zifran fleet. The human leaned forward slightly. Tell me, Commander, do you understand why we let you go? Valric hesitated. Why hadn't they attacked? The human continued. You think this was about strength, that if you had more ships, better weapons, a larger fleet, the outcome would have been different. His expression hardened. It wouldn't. A heavy silence filled the bridge. The human's voice dropped to a near whisper. You fight for conquest, he said. We fight to survive. Valric felt something he had never experienced before. Not just fear, not just respect. Understanding. This is your only warning, the human said, voice cold. Do not test humanity again. The transmission ended. For a long moment, no one spoke. Valric turned to his crew. Prepare the fleet. We are returning home. The Zifran fleet turned away, leaving the human warship behind. And for the first time in Zifran history, they truly understood what it meant to fear. The Zifran homeworld was eerily silent. The grand halls of the War Council, once filled with ambitious voices planning conquests, now stood in uneasy quiet. Every leader, every high-ranking official, had gathered to discuss the unthinkable, their first true defeat. Commander Valric stood before them, his face unreadable. He had been summoned not as a hero, but as a cautionary tale. The High Chancellor leaned forward, his golden eyes narrowed. You faced a single human warship, and you retreated. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The accusation was clear. Cowardice. Valric, however, remained calm. He had expected this. He had spent every moment since his return preparing for this conversation. Chancellor, he said evenly, do you know what that warship's name was? The Chancellor's mandibles twitched in irritation. What does it matter? Valric's eyes locked onto his. Vanguard. The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. A vanguard was not a fleet. It was not an armada. It was the first ship. A scout. An introduction. If Vanguard had been sent alone, it meant that the humans had not needed reinforcements. It meant that the warship could have destroyed them without support. And worst of all, it meant more were coming. The Chancellor's voice was quieter now. You believe they are warning us. Valric nodded. Humans do not fight for conquest. They fight for survival. And when they fight, they do not hold back. A silence stretched across the chamber as the realization settled in. Then a low chime echoed through the hall. A transmission. An officer hurried in, his skin pale. Chancellor, he stammered. A message has arrived. From whom? The officer swallowed. From them. The Chancellor motioned for the transmission to play. A single sentence appeared on the screen. We let you go once. Do not make us reconsider. A heavy silence filled the chamber. No one spoke. No one moved. For the first time in their history, the Zifrin did not discuss war. They discussed survival.